all cold night. A small boy stood outside with nothing but a torn bag and broken dreams. His stepmother slammed the door and said, "You will never become anything." He had no home, no money, no one to believe in him. But sometimes, the people who reject you accidentally push you toward your destiny. He slept on benches, worked harder than anyone else, and turned every insult into fuel. Years later, the same boy returned, not as a beggar, but as the president of a nation. The woman who once threw him away couldn't believe her eyes. This is a story about pain, determination, and the sweetest revenge of all success. Stay until the end, because some endings are worth waiting for. The rain poured heavily on the small village that night. Thunder shook the sky, and cold wind rushed through the narrow streets. Inside a tiny house, 12-year-old Daniel stood trembling, clutching an old school bag tightly against his chest. His stepmother, Margaret, glared at him with eyes full of hatred. "You are nothing but a burden," she snapped. Daniel looked down, trying to hide the tears forming in his eyes. I can help more around the house," he whispered. But Margaret had already made up her mind. She grabbed his bag, threw it outside, and pointed toward the dark road. "Get out. I don't want to see your face ever again." Daniel turned to his father, hoping for help. But his father stood silently, his head lowered, too weak to defend his own son. That silence hurt more than Margaret's cruel words. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Daniel stepped into the storm. The door slammed behind him. And just like that, a child became homeless. Daniel walked for hours under the pouring rain. His clothes were soaked, and his stomach growled with hunger. He had nowhere to go. No relatives, no friends, no money. He finally found shelter under an old bus station bench. Curling up against the cold metal, he cried himself to sleep. That night, Daniel made a promise to himself. "One day, I will prove them wrong." The next morning, he woke up hungry and exhausted. He searched for food in garbage bins. He polished shoes for coins. He carried groceries for strangers. Every penny he earned, he saved. Despite his struggles, Daniel never gave up on school. He attended classes wearing worn-out clothes and broken shoes. His classmates mocked him. Teachers often pitied him. But Daniel ignored them all. He had a dream, and dreams don't care about poverty. One day, his history teacher, Mr. Thompson, noticed Daniel studying alone after school. "Why do you work so hard?" he asked. Daniel looked up. "Because I have no choice." Mr. Thompson smiled gently. "No, son. You work hard because you have greatness inside you." Those words changed Daniel forever. For the first time, someone believed in him. Mr. Thompson helped Daniel apply for scholarships. He provided books. He even offered Daniel a small room behind his garage. It wasn't much, but to Daniel it felt palace. Years passed. Daniel graduated at the top of his class. Then he earned a scholarship to one of the best universities in the country. He studied political science. He worked nights. He slept little. But he never complained. Pain had taught him discipline. After college, Daniel entered public service. He fought corruption. He defended the poor. He spoke for those who had no voice. People admired his honesty. They trusted him. His speeches inspired millions. Election after election, his popularity grew. Until one historic day, the nation voted. And Daniel Carter became the youngest president in the country's history. The homeless boy had become the leader of millions. News spread everywhere. Margaret watched the inauguration on television. Her face turned pale. Her hands shook. Set. That's Daniel. The boy she had thrown away. The boy she had called worthless. He now stood before the world, hand raised, taking the presidential oath. Tears filled her eyes. Not of sadness, but of regret. Months later, President Daniel visited his hometown. Crowds lined the streets. People cheered. Children waved flags. As his motorcade passed the old neighborhood, Daniel asked the driver to stop. He stepped out and walked toward the very house where his life had changed forever. Margaret stood frozen at the door. Now, weaker, ashamed, she couldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Daniel looked at her quietly. The pain of that rainy night flashed before him. But so did the lessons it taught him. He smiled softly. If you hadn't pushed me out, I might never have learned how strong I could be. Margaret burst into tears. Daniel reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was the deed to a new house and enough money to live comfortably. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. After everything I did, why? Daniel's answer left everyone speechless. Because kindness is the revenge of great people. Reporters captured the moment. The story spread around the world. Millions were inspired. Daniel became known not only as a great president, but as a great man. He later created programs for homeless children, scholarships for underprivileged students, and shelters for abused youth. He never forgot where he came from, and he made sure no child would ever feel as alone as he once had. Years later, during an interview, a journalist asked him, "What was the turning point in your life?" Daniel smiled. "The night I lost everything." He paused. Because sometimes, losing your home is the first step toward finding your purpose. Life had come full circle. The boy once abandoned in the rain had become a beacon of hope. His story proved one powerful truth. Your past does not define your future. Other people's opinions do not determine your destiny. And sometimes, the greatest victories begin with the deepest pain. So if life has ever closed a door on you, remember Daniel. Because one slammed door can lead to 1,000 open ones. The years rolled on. But President Daniel Carter never forgot the sound of that door slamming behind him. It had become the soundtrack of his determination. Every law he signed, every school he built, every shelter he opened carried a piece of that painful night. He often visited orphanages without cameras. He would sit with children, listen to their stories, and remind them that their circumstances did not define them. One little boy once asked him, "Mr. President, were you ever scared?" Daniel smiled. "Every single day." The boy looked surprised. "Then how did you become so brave?" Daniel gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're terrified. Those words soon spread across the country. Margaret changed too. The guilt she carried was heavier than any punishment life could have given her. She spent her remaining years volunteering at homeless shelters, helping children who reminded her of the boy she had once rejected. One afternoon, she visited one of Daniel's shelters. A young girl ran up and hugged her. In that moment, Margaret Cost, and perhaps, for the first time in her life, she truly changed. Daniel's father, Robert, had lived for years with silent regret. He had failed his son when it mattered most. One evening, he asked Daniel if they could talk alone. They sat together in the White House garden. Robert's hands trembled. "I should have protected you." Daniel remained quiet. "I was weak," Robert continued. "And I've hated myself every day since." After a long silence, Daniel spoke. "You broke my heart that night." Robert lowered his head. But holding on to anger would only break it again. Tears streamed down Robert's face as Daniel embraced him. For the first time in decades, father and son were whole again. Daniel's presidency became one of the most admired in history. Unemployment dropped. Education flourished. Healthcare became accessible to millions. But his proudest achievement was the National Hope Initiative program, ensuring every homeless child received shelter, education, and protection. At the launch ceremony, Daniel stood before thousands. "I was once a homeless child," he said. The crowd fell silent. "I know what it feels like to be abandoned. That's why no child in this country should ever feel invisible." The nation erupted in applause. Years later, after serving to successful terms, Daniel retired from politics. But his work was far from over. He founded the Carter Foundation, helping disadvantaged children around the world. Schools, hospitals, and shelters were built in dozens of countries. His name became a symbol of resilience, a symbol of hope, a symbol of second chances. On his 70th birthday, Daniel returned to the old bus station where he had once slept as a frightened boy. The bench was still there. He sat quietly, running his fingers across the cold metal. A reporter standing nearby asked, "What are you thinking about?" Daniel smiled warmly. As the sun began to set, children from his foundation gathered around him. They laughed, played, and called him Grandpa Daniel. He looked at their smiling faces and realized something beautiful. The pain that once nearly destroyed him had become the very thing that saved countless others. Before his death, Daniel wrote a letter to be opened after he was gone. It read, "If you are reading this, remember one thing. People may reject you. They may underestimate you. They may even abandon you. Your scars are proof that you survived. Your struggles are preparing you for something greater. And your story is not over yet." Daniel Carter passed away peacefully at the age of 87. The nation mourned. Leaders from around the world attended his funeral. Millions lined the streets. But perhaps the most touching sight was this. Thousands of former homeless children, now doctors, teachers, engineers, and parents stood together, holding candles. Each one represented a life Daniel had changed. Each one was part of his legacy. On his gravestone were engraved the words, "And so, the boy who had been thrown away became a man the world would never forget."